We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end...
What will I become?
Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
With threats to our nation waiting around every corner, adaptability is more important than ever. When conditions change without notice, quick strategic thinking is crucial. And with obstacles consistently impending, determination is essential in overcoming them. It's this willingness, decisiveness, and resilience that sets Marines apart. With our fighting spirit, we don't just fight battles, we win them. Marines are the constant our nation counts on to fight the unknown. And through adaptable problem solving, we do just that. Learn more at marines.com.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim. We are continuing our series in talking about the state of each Big Ten program. If you've liked the series, make sure to like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Google, Spotify. Make sure you check us out on YouTube. Hit the like button, smash the subscribe button. I am very excited to continue in our series by looking at the state of the Boilermakers. And Russ is coming on from the Boiler Express podcast as part of the College Huddle community. Russ, thanks for joining us. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Zach. So like you said, I'm with the Boiler Express podcast, which is the Purdue representative in the College Huddle. We're 5 just knucklehead Purdue fans. Only one of us actually went to Purdue, but we all have ties to Purdue. That's part of being a Purdue fan is you don't find casual Purdue fans that just scroll through and like this team. Like my parents met at Purdue. My brother graduated from Purdue. I've got a lot of family that worked at Purdue. So, and that's kind of the ties with all of us. So we just, we want to be positive. We started the podcast because, as you know, in college sports as a whole, there can be a lot of negativity, but Purdue fan base as a whole was pretty negative, especially during the Hazel era of Purdue football. And so we decided we're going to start our own little podcast and just be 4 or 5 dads in our garage, in our basement, whatever. Just, if it catches on, that's great. If people get something out of it, that's great. But, otherwise we're just going to talk about Purdue football and Purdue sports and have a good time doing it. So you can check us out, Boiler Express, followed by an underscore on Twitter and on Instagram. But anywhere you find podcasts, you can look up Boiler Express on YouTube. We're out there. Very
cool. How long have you guys, when did you actually start recording and putting out episodes?
I believe it was just a little over 2 years ago was when we started. Yeah.
Very fun. And I had Eric on from the OHIO podcast, who's kind of one of the ring generals of the College Huddle. And you have been kind of behind the scenes there too. Maybe just share a little bit about your excitement about the College Huddle community that's really formed over the past several months.
Yeah. Eric, we were part of a former collective of kind of podcasts for just the Big Ten that kind of didn't work out. There's just some things that logistically didn't work out. And so we got met back up kind of coming out of that and said, hey, let's not just do Big Ten. Let's do like college football as a whole and see if we can't get something going and try to get one representative from, each kind of conference and then kind of grow it from year after year on that. And we had a goal of I think 25 by this summer, and we're over 70 now. It's been awesome. It's just picked up a lot of steam, and it's it's the largest collection of fan-based podcasts because there's a lot of media out there where you get, obviously, especially national, like ESPN, CBS, Fox, it's like former players or former whatever, and they've got their ties to the program, but there's not many like fan-based, like people like you and me, or like that are just like, we want to hear what our fellow fans think of something. So this is a collective of that, and it's been a lot of fun. Also, just talking to other guys and getting through life. Like there's some things that's gone on with a guy from the Missouri pod that he had a bad work injury, and guys from that collective were paying him a visit. A guy from like the Arkansas podcast came by the hospital, and guys were starting to go fund me and we're kind of raising money for him. So it's just been really cool to like kind of just see how small the world can get when you have a common interest in college football. And it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun. It's going to be really exciting because basically every opponent we play now, we can reach out and be like, hey, we're playing Ohio State. Let's look up and talk to the OHI guys and Eric. But I mean, we're playing Oregon State in our non-conference this year, and there's an Oregon State pod. There's a Notre Dame guy on there, so we can talk to Notre Dame. So it's really cool. It's going to be really awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been fun. And I was just thinking, Russ, you and I were on my first exposure to the Big Ten huddle. We were talking Purdue. It was after Fresno State, Purdue, and we were breaking that game down. And I remember thinking after that episode, there's something special about just this collection of people connecting over sports and talking through this as not just fans, I think knowledgeable fans, but fans that really care about the sport and about the teams and about just everything that goes into it. So it's really fun.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, we were talking off air about this, Russ. I have a little trepidation with Purdue because as an Ohio State fan, people don't realize that up until I think this year, over the past 25 years, the team that has beaten Ohio State the most in the Big Ten, it wasn't Michigan. It wasn't Penn State. It was Purdue. And particularly, I remember in 2018, before the season began, I circled the Purdue game and I said, they're going to lose that game. I didn't think they were going to lose as bad as they did, but they got crushed. And there's just, I think a lot of people look at Purdue sometimes and think Purdue is kind of an also-ran. And then you forget that Purdue springs upsets like nobody's business. And a lot of that has had to do with several different coaches who have been excellent for the program. So I think of Joe Tiller, who has sadly passed away several years ago, but Jeff Brom recently. I want to ask you, because I think a lot of other Big Ten fans don't really understand the past 25 years of Purdue and how good they've been over the past 25 years. So just give us a rundown. What is the past quarter century looked like for Purdue? And then I'll kind of bring us back to the current here and now, but just kind of give us that trajectory the past 25 years.
Yeah. So, you go back 25 years ago and like you said, Joe Tiller was the coach at that time. And really, if you go back to before the Joe Tiller era, Purdue, they have a decent program. I think before Joe Tiller got there, we had 11 conference titles, but the last one was in 1967 before we ended up winning the 2000 title with Tiller and Drew Brees. But there's also a lot less bowl games, right? Like I think you go back to like 1971, there was 10 bowl games, so there wasn't the 35, 40 that we have now. Even in 97, there was only 20 bowl games. So as a program, we'd only been to 5 bowl games, even though we had, 10 conference titles. Whatever. That just shows you how rare bowl games were before he came in. But we went to 10 bowl games in 12 years with Tiller. He kind of put Purdue football a little bit on the map. He revolutionized kind of the way that football was played in the Midwest. Big Ten football is people still think of it as a ground and pound, but he brought basketball and grass to the Big Ten. That's kind of how he was very successful. He said, look, if you've seen like We Are Marshall, when they said, look, we're going to change it up and play something different. We're not going to play this. We're going to lose this ground and pound style. So he said, we're going to throw the ball over the turf and air it out. And that's what he did. And it was successful at Purdue. But we didn't transition too well. Purdue historically, even up to like the mid, 2010s, was not a university that invested a lot in their sports, and especially in the football program. When, Mitch Daniels hired Mike Babinski, one of the first big hires Babinski made as athletic director was hiring Jeff Brom. When we brought Jeff Brom in, that was on the heel of 2 coaches that went 4 years and were done, and Danny Hope and Daryl Hazel, like I talked about earlier, that wasn't really good. We went to like, I think 1 bowl game in 8 years, maybe 2 bowl games in 8 years. And it was not good. Daryl Hazel won like 4 Big Ten games over 4 years. So we needed to turn the program around and put money back in the program. And that's what they did. They went out and spent money to get Jeff Brom. They gave him a lot of money for assistance. And you kind of saw what happened. Like, it wasn't like we were world beaters. We didn't, win 10 games, 12 games, go to some, college football playoff, but, we did win a West title. The season before that, we won 9 games and beat Tennessee in one of the craziest bowl games I've ever been to. And, it was very successful, but then obviously Jeff Brom's alma mater comes calling and goes down to Louisville and kind of guts our program a little bit in the process. We also had a lot of guys graduate, like Aiden O'Connell, Charlie Jones. And so it kind of left us going into last year, kind of behind the 8 ball. Ryan Walters, bring him in from Illinois. He was the defensive coordinator, the coordinator of the year in the country. So it was a hire that we all kind of liked, but we knew it was going to be tough. And sure enough, we went 4-8 against the nation's toughest schedule per Pro Football Focus. And it really, I don't think it was as bad as what 4-8 can look on paper, but it's still been positive for the Purdue fan base. I went to the Minnesota game when we were, I believe, like 2-7, eliminated from bowl contention, and that place was 90-95% full. So there's, despite what's happened this last year, people are still very, very excited about Purdue football. And, we had this sense, like you said, Purdue's kind of, people don't really think about Purdue. Like they kind of sleep on Purdue, especially from a football standpoint. Now, basketball, Purdue fans kind of have a chip on their shoulder because they're always, what's going to happen? This is the reason Purdue's going to fail this year. But in football, it's just like, they'll be last or second to last. Like a lot of places have us 18th this year in the Big Ten. And so I think Purdue fans are kind of fine with that. They're like, hey, don't expect much out of us, and that way we can surprise you when we do it. When we pull off that upset against Ohio State and beat them 49-20. Now, it doesn't happen very often, but Purdue actually has the most wins against top 5 opponents as an unranked team of any team in Division I.
Yeah.
So that's a little fun fact for those out there that don't know that. So
yeah. Well, and even recently 2021, number 2 Michigan State. I think they beat number 2 Iowa too that year. Right?
Yeah, it was number 2 Iowa, number 3 Michigan State, or flipped. It was number 2 Michigan State, number 3 Iowa. But yeah, we had 2 top 5 wins in one season as an unranked team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I am just relieved that Ohio State doesn't go to Ross-Ade this year. Cause I don't think I could hear the end of it if Ohio State beats Oregon and then loses at Ross-Ade. And knowing Ohio State's history, it would happen. Like just we're not going to go there.
Well, because it always seems to happen in a season like this that's building for Ohio State, where they're a super team, they're going to win the national title, and then that's the season where Purdue just somehow nips their heels. And
yeah, and it's like but they do have talent, which we'll get to. I do want to ask before we get to really the makeup of the team. Jeff Brom, I thought was wildly successful, right? Won the West, really brought in new, fresh ideas. He really was an innovator. I think it was the bowl game against Arizona. I think everybody thought Arizona was going to wipe the floor, and Purdue went. I think Purdue won that game. They beat Tennessee. They beat Tennessee with like their 5th string wide receiver. It was unreal. And it kind of seemed like everything was really trending in a great direction. And then all of a sudden Jeff Brom leaves, and then the bowl game against LSU happens. It felt like momentum in some ways kind of stalled. How did the fan base react to Jeff Brom leaving? I'm sure there was certainly sadness, but was there anger? Was there frustration? Was there understanding? What was that like?
Yeah, so it just kind of, I think, depends on the not to talk ill of some fellow fans, but depends on their education level, really. I have a unique perspective because I live just outside of Louisville. I married a Louisville grad. I have a brother-in-law who played for Louisville, so I know about the Brom family and the ties to Louisville. And so, myself and even the guys at Boiler Express knew of Brom's ties to Louisville, so we knew eventually at some point he would be leaving for Louisville. I think what caught people most off guard was the abruptness of it. The fact that, Louisville had a coach in Scott Satterfield that was under contract for an extended period of time. Purdue had just gone obviously to the Big Ten championship game. And, we go from Friday, Saturday going to the championship game against Michigan, pumped up going, hey, we're playing on house money. Let's see what happens. We could maybe pull off an upset. It's in Indianapolis. We'll see what happens. To then Tuesday morning, we don't have a coach. Because all of a sudden Monday, Cincinnati hires away Louisville's head coach, and there's an opening now. And, that's one part that kind of upset some fans. And then the fact that his brother stayed and was the interim coach through that winter, through that bowl game. And we only practiced like on half the practice we could have used. and guys that were in that locker room that played in that bowl game then go to Louisville. Like that whole transition, I think, ticked a lot of fans off. But I don't think there's a ton now that really have a lot of ill will towards Jeff Brom or his family for going down there, because that's his alma mater. That's his dream job. You know, that's the only job we thought he would have left for. And after his second year at Purdue, he actually could have taken the job. That's when they brought Petrino back to Louisville. And he actually turned Louisville down because he was only 2 years into what he was doing at Purdue. So, you know, if you know that whole backstory, I don't think you can really be mad at the fact that Jeff Brom left for Louisville.
And I was gonna say Jeff Brom was at Purdue what, 5 years, 6 years?
6 years. 6 years. Yep.
And so that's,
Yep.
I mean, it's significant. I mean, I feel like that's eons for current college football.
Yeah.
But I can understand though the abruptness and that transition point being a point of frustration. But I think that's a reasonable take to say, hey, that could have gone better. And like Louisville was the dream job for Brom. And it's not because it was like, oh, this is national championship or bust. This was his, where he grew up. It's his alma mater. It's the program he wants to see succeed more than any other program. And so I think that's a really reasonable take for sure. Purdue obviously went 4-8 last year, is disappointing, but there were certainly glimmers of hope. You mentioned 2-7 going into, I think, the Minnesota game.
Mm-hmm.
They finished 2-1 after that game. So they finished 4-8, finished well. What were some of the glimmers of hope that Ryan Walters is the right guy for this job?
Yeah, so this is where we get into, you know, Purdue fans going, okay, it's fine, sleep on us, because we know what people don't want to talk about. So Rutgers, Nebraska, Illinois, Minnesota, and Purdue all finished with the same conference record. But what is the stigma or thought process of those other schools going into this year based off, you know, compared to Purdue? You know, and Purdue played 3 of those teams and were 2-1 in those games. And the Illinois and Minnesota game, if you watch those, outside of maybe the big 3 teams in the Big Ten and Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, those were probably 2 of the most impressive performances, I think, by a Big Ten team last year in conference play. You know, we absolutely handled both of those games against Illinois and Minnesota. And that was the glimpse of like, okay, if we protect Hudson Card, we run the Graham Harrell offense, we run the Walters defense, this is what it can look like. But it was, you know, because we had those glimmers of hope, even though we were 4-8, we can understand, hey, Walters was behind the 8 ball, because along with that transition, you know, most of the time if a school knows they're transitioning head coaches, their head coach has been fired with a game or 2 maybe left in the season. They're already doing the head coaching search, and they're probably already hired by the time a lot of these conference championship games happen. Well, we lost our coach after the championship game. Then we took our time finding the new coach. And so we're, you know, only, you know, we're probably a month after a lot of the other schools have already got their new head coach before Walters is finally getting in the building, trying to recruit, trying to hit the transfer portal. And so he was kind of almost stuck with the roster going into last year, if that makes sense. Like he was able to get Hudson Card. That was a huge get, but he couldn't exactly get numbers going into last year. So the fact that we saw when the stars align what it can look like, and then now you enter the class that we're bringing in this summer, I think that's why there's still optimism and a ton of optimism inside the Purdue fan base for this year.
Yeah, well, and I think Ryan Walters is a tremendous defensive coach, but often when you bring in a new defensive system, and this is true of offense too, but with a new defensive system takes time, right? We saw that, you know, with Jim Knowles at Ohio State. Everybody was ready for Jim Knowles in 2022, and then it fell apart. And you're like, why did it fall apart? Because it was year 1. And so this is year 2 for Ryan Walters. What do you expect for the Boilermakers defense in terms of their ability to adjust to his defensive scheme in year 2?
Well, so, you know, for those that don't know Ryan Walters' defensive scheme, it's very, very unique, to put it lightly. You know, I described it to people last year. You know, if you play video games and you play Madden and you've played those special teams formations where there's a formation called punt return safe man, which basically has 10 guys on the line of scrimmage, 1 guy's deep, almost like he's returning the punt, and everybody up on the line is running some kind of zone or man coverage. And that's what Purdue's defense is. Like, it's very unique. Like, a lot of times if you watch it on TV, you think we got 10 guys on the field because Dylan Thieneman, our safety, is so deep, he's not even on that initial sideline camera. So it takes a very unique skill set to be able to play those press and close to line coverages, and we didn't exactly have those personnel last year. Walters has shown the ability to put guys in the NFL, but he's got to get the right guys. Our defense especially on the line was ran by 2 transfer corners and 2 safeties trying to play in, tight coverage instead of playing safety last year. So that exposed us a lot on those like 8, 10, 15-yard passes in the passing game. And I think that should be shored up this year. We've got a lot of, talent coming in. And I think we have 4 4-star guys in the secondary alone coming in this year. So that should, we should have the personnel to start to make that kind of adjustment and turn the corner on his defense for sure.
Yeah, so it sounds like multiple things: having the right guys, having the talent, but then also it's a very unique scheme that you're probably not learning in high school. You're probably not learning in most, even when Jeff Brom was there. And so you have to figure out the right personnel, but then you also have to learn the actual concepts of the defense, and that takes time.
Mhm.
I think similarly, you're talking about the Graham Harrell offense. Hudson Card's now in year 2. I still think Hudson Card is a top half of the Big Ten quarterback. I think he's talented. I think he's experienced. What do you expect from him in this offense in year 2?
Yeah, so Hudson Card was 3rd in the conference in passing yards per game last year, 5th in passing yards total because he did miss a game. But that was like we talked about with Illinois and Minnesota. The big issue was could we protect Hudson Card? And when we protected him, he looked like a top, not just top half, but top 3 or 4 quarterback in the conference. And I think he has the talent to go to the next level if he can just exhibit that and kind of learn this system without worrying about getting pummeled from behind or getting running for his life back there. And that's one of the big adjustments we made on offense was we brought in a ton of guys on the offensive line to try to revamp that offensive line. Last year in spring ball, part of the reason we could have a spring game last year in Walter's first year was we had like 8 healthy offensive linemen. So this year we've got like 17 or 18. So, that's a big difference. I think that's going to change this year. And you're going to see Hudson Card look a lot more comfortable back there for us and have a lot more time to actually run the offense that Harrell's designed instead of kind of having to create things and run for his life like he did this last year.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought up the line. So it sounds like there's depth at the line. It also seems like there's at least the projected depth chart that I've seen, a lot of juniors and seniors. What would you say the outlook is in terms of their ceiling? Like, do you think this is a middle of the road offensive line? Do you think they could be a top 3rd offensive line in the Big Ten? What are your expectations for the line?
Yeah, I think they could be at least the middle of the road. Yes. If not, top half, top 3rd. They do have, like you said, they've got the leadership, they've got experience, they've got guys that, have played, either 2 or 3 years here or elsewhere. And it's just a matter of being able to get cohesive through spring ball and through the summer, having a spring game and having, the personnel to get a lot of reps in the spring through training camp is going to be huge for them to mesh. But like last year, we started with our 3rd string center the first game of the season, like that's how like behind the 8 ball we were as far as offensive line goes. So, I think the expectations for them are to basically not be a talking point for Purdue football this year. We with all the, running for the life that Hudson Card did and all the trouble that we had picking up 1 yard on 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1, the goal would be for them to not necessarily be talked about. I don't expect them to be a top 3 or 4 one of the greatest lines in the conference this year, but they've got to just don't be the focal point. Don't make the headline after the game's over.
Yeah. Is there a guy that you're like, they can't lose him on the line?
Definitely be Gus Hartwig. Gus Hartwig was a senior for us last year at center, but he literally started the season out and struggled through injury. And then I would say, if there's a 1A to that or 1A and 1B to that would be Marcus Embo as well. Marcus Embo was our highest rated offensive lineman per Pro Football Focus, and he's been huge for us as well. So I would say Gus Hartwig for sure, and after that I would say Marcus Embo would be huge for us to keep him healthy. Yeah.
Hartwick, Embo, be on the lookout for those 2 guys. Obviously, Maccabee, great story of Maccabee. And I just a fine player. Like, I love watching him play. Outside of him, I feel like Purdue has been known for receiver play, but who are the receivers and maybe other playmakers to exploit? I know Maccabee's a running back, but I feel like the running back position is solid. Who are the guys on the outside that can really do some damage, or who could do damage for Purdue?
Yeah, so I'm gonna kind of avoid your question here, and I'm gonna give you two names that aren't even receivers to
Oh
watch for.
man.
And that's Max Clare at tight end for us. Was a freshman
Mm,
last year. Coming into his sophomore season, he only played I think 5 games last year, but he's actually our returning pass catcher from last season.
yeah.
He only had 197 yards receiving, but he is very talented, extremely talented. I think he is we're talking second or third team All Big Ten this year, possibly at tight end for us, and they're going to use him a lot. Like they went to him a lot even in the spring game. And then Reggie Love at running back, led Illinois in rushing last year.
Yep.
He's coming back. He's kind of a COVID extended career player, and obviously has that connection with Walters from Illinois. He's going to come over and be kind of our, the 1B to Maccabee's 1A and really help out the running game. But, we did revamp the wide receiver room. I think it's a lot better than what we ended the season last year. But there's just so many guys that I would be guessing if I would say it's going to be, Jaden Dixon-Veal or, CJ Smith from Georgia, who's a speedster. He could be really, stretch the field for us. Andrew Sawinski caught the first touchdown in the spring game. He's a kind of a possession receiver, but can kind of be shifty and get lost in there. So, we've got a lot of guys I could run down the wide receiver list, but it's just who's going to step up for that. And being a Graham Harrell who comes from the Mike Leach, coaching tree, they're going to throw the ball over the grass, all the field, and somebody's going to have a chance to step up for sure at the wide receiver room. But I think Max Clare could lead us in receiving as a tight end this year.
Yeah. There's a trend in some of what you're talking about, Russ, and not just with the potential playmakers, but with the line too, is that there's an abundance that you're trying to shuffle through, where I think a year ago that wasn't the case. And I think that goes to part of what you were saying before about just the reality that you were stuck. You were stuck with the roster you had. And now Ryan Walters has done a lot of work, both in recruiting. I thought he did a phenomenal job recruiting for Purdue this year, but then also work in the portal, getting guys from programs like Georgia. Like people might say, oh, well, he's the cast off from Georgia, but it matters, especially for your pedigree and your profile, to get guys from former national championship teams. And, I think CJ Smith, he's a speedster. That's something that was desperately needed a year ago. And so who knows if he's going to contribute this year, but the fact that you have that option, like people need to realize that is like those are question marks in the reality that they actually have something, they have something they can work with. Whereas maybe a year ago, those question marks were, we don't have anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You mentioned Thieneman. Again, great player. Who else should we be paying attention to defensively?
So defensively, I'll give you two more names. So Kadrian Jenkins, if you didn't hear about him last year, he kind of burst on the scene a little bit. He was third, I believe, in the Big Ten in sacks last year. Nick Scorton led the team and the conference in sacks, but he's off to Texas A&M. He's not on the team anymore. So Kadrian Jenkins is kind of moving to a middle linebacker role for us, but he'll still get after the quarterback, but he's in a role where he can be much more impactful now on the defensive end, especially in like the run game and on the pass rush game. And then Nyland Green, one of those guys you're mentioning that came up from Georgia, he was actually, I think, the 6th or 7th highest rated defender on Georgia's team last year for Pro Football Focus. So he's not necessarily a cast-off. He's a talented guy. He might not have been the best guy on their defense, but he's very talented. He's a big cornerback. He's a shutdown corner who will be able to, I think, display some skills and go toe-to-toe with a guy like Emeka Egbuka. I'm looking forward to that matchup. I told people, going back to the 2018 game, I didn't expect Purdue necessarily to win that game against Ohio State, but a buddy of mine that I work with is an Ohio State fan. He goes, "Well, you all going to bowl the upset?" And I said, "I don't know, but you'll know the name Rondale Moore. I don't know that we're going to be Ohio State this year, but you'll know the name Nyland Green. I think you'll see him go toe-to-toe with Emeka Egbuka and give him everything he can handle."
Yeah. Well, and what a big deal that would be to have a corner who can shut down the best receiver. And if you look at the conference and who Purdue plays, that might be enough to get a big upset or two. In I think a really difficult schedule, which we'll get to in a minute. Just real quick, talk about Thieneman. What makes him such a good player?
I mean, he's a worker. He's a worker. He's a legacy kind of. He's the Thienemans have been through Purdue. He's the youngest, I think, of three brothers that have played at Purdue. But Walter's even going into last season said he thinks he might be the best of the three brothers. And he also was in the running for the fastest guy on the team last year. He is freaky fast. You'll see it this year if you watch more Purdue football. He plays that deep role, and the reason he's the last man and the reason that Walter's put in that position was because of his speed. He wasn't obviously he doesn't have the experience, and he was a true freshman last year, but 6 interceptions, 13 All-American. Like, he's obviously got the talent, he's got the nose for the football, and he's that guy that's the first guy in the practice facility and the last guy to leave. He knows that he's got to work for everything that he's going to get because he doesn't want to just live off the last name or live off the fact that, his family's been through Purdue. Like, he wants to succeed and he means business. I was at the Virginia Tech game that was rain delayed by 6 hours. And he was one of the first guys back on the field getting ready to resume the game that night. He is just bring your lunch pail, put on your hard hat. He is going to outwork you and he is going to come through you to get that football. Like, he actually was, I think, the better rated version of him as a defender was, again, the run game than pass game. And imagine that, like, he's playing 15, 20 yards off the ball, but he's rated higher playing the run than the pass because he gets downfield after the ball too. Like, he wants to be a part of every single play and impact everything. And he is not going to get beat over the top. We struggled on defense last year because of the intermediate stuff, but we did not get beat on home run balls because of Dylan Thieneman.
Well, and to think he was a freshman a year ago. He learns all this. He has to condition his body in a position where you are running back and forth all the time. You've got to be a hard worker to be able to sustain that. And he did. And so big work ethic and character and talent. It's going to be fun that we get to watch him 2 more years, at least 2 more years.
Absolutely.
We'll see maybe if he sticks it for another 3, but we talked a little bit about the schedule. We were just on the Big Ten huddle. We were talking about how absurdly easy some schedules were. Iowa, Rutgers. You guys do not have that luxury. If you pull up the schedule, it's Notre Dame, Oregon State, which may not be as good as last year's version with all the transition, but it's still Oregon State. Nebraska, which is retooling. Wisconsin at Camp Randall, Oregon, Penn State, at Ohio State. Like, that's really hard. And I mean, you're talking about possibly the top 3 teams in the Big Ten, and you have to play at Wisconsin. You have to play Notre Dame. That could be ultimately 4 top 10 teams. And a tough road game against Wisconsin. How do you, maybe the first thing is, as you look at that schedule as a fan, what do you think? Just first reaction to that.
Buckle up. Yeah, it's rough. I mean, it's easy to sit here and, I just did an episode last night with Dylan, going through our roster and what we've brought back and what we're bringing in. And it's really exciting. And you sit there and think, in the old school Big Ten, this is an easily an 8-4, 9-3 ball club, I think. But then you look at the schedule and you go, oh yeah. Well, I don't know about that. And we're coming off like I said, the toughest schedule last year per Pro Football Focus. So it doesn't seem like it gets any easier. And it's tough. You look at that schedule and you go, at Ohio State's probably a loss, At Oregon State, we're going to Oregon State. So it's not just that we're playing an Oregon State game that's retooling. We have to go all the way out to the West Coast and hopefully pull that off. Bringing Oregon in, bringing Notre Dame in, bringing Penn State in, Nebraska. It's definitely, it's not going to be an easy schedule. And I think the real storyline at the end of the season is what does the roster look like? I don't think that I'm going to think the sky's falling if we go 4-8 again. But at this point, especially with NIL and the transfer portal, you got to think, are we going to keep the guys in the building? Because Nick Scorton was a guy that he was Mr. Purdue last offseason. He was pounding the drum. He was on socials, getting people in the building, and now he's gone at Texas A&M. So, I think that's my biggest worry for the season is what does the season and the team look like long term. But yeah, I can see anywhere from, honestly, I can see anywhere from 2 to 10 to 10 and 2. Just kind of depend on because when you look at Hudson Card and you say it's a quarterback's game and he's a top 5, top 3 quarterback in the Big Ten, if we protect him, we should be able to hang with anybody. So,
yeah. Oh, and you're saying 10 and 2. What would you say the realistic ceiling is for Purdue with this schedule?
I think the realistic ceiling is probably more like an 8 and 4. I think, you obviously you get to 8 to 4. That means you're winning one of those games like an at Wisconsin or a Notre Dame at home or an Oregon at home or a Penn State at home. And like you said, we've pulled off those games in the past and we've been in those games in the past. I was at the home opener, 2 or 3 years ago against Penn State that we had that game, handled. We had the ball twice with less than 5 minutes left in the lead. And we couldn't pick up first down to put them away. And they end up escaping Ross-Ade with a win. And now we get them back in Ross-Ade. Oregon's a night game. It's a night game at Ross-Ade. And, like we've talked about, Purdue is the Spoilermakers. Even as an unranked team, they beat those top 5 teams in I almost said Mackey and Ross-Ade all the time. So, I don't think it's far-fetched that we could, in year 2 of Ron Walters, pull off an upset or two like that, take care of business in some of these toss-up games or the games that might lean our favor, and we end up with an 8 and 4 season. But winning all those, yeah, that's, it's going to be tough.
Yeah. The one thing I will say, I think that is in your favor is that a lot of the teams that you guys are playing, there are a lot of them are in transition, right? Like Wisconsin, like I think a lot of people assume that Wisconsin is going to be much better in year 2 under Fickell, but that's not necessarily a done deal, right? Like Tyler Van Dyke comes in, he's got to learn a whole new offense. I'm still not sure if that offensive system is going to work in Madison. And so, yes, they have to go to Camp Randall, but that is, I think, an advantage. I think Illinois, are they going to be like Illinois of 2 years ago? Or are they going to be Illinois of last year? We're not sure. Nebraska, I happen to think that Nebraska is going to be really good next year. There's a lot of question marks though. Like you're starting a freshman quarterback, most likely. Freshmen do stupid things. Freshmen might do really stupid things at Ross-Ade. So I think there is a lot, even Notre Dame and Penn State. And I'll throw Ohio State in there. I think, Ohio State's at Columbus, but I'm on record of saying I don't know how I feel about Will Howard, and as much as I like the talent surrounding him, I could see a quarterback having a bad day. Now it's in Columbus, so I'm probably less. I'd probably pick Ohio State there by a wide margin, but I think some of the other ones, I'm like Penn State.
Oregon comes to Ross-Ade right after playing Ohio State.
Yeah.
So Oregon's got that big build up to playing Ohio State at home, but then they got to travel all the way across the country to play at Ross-Ade.
And it's a Friday night. I just realized that that's a Friday night game.
Yeah.
So
short week, night game, Ross-Ade. Yeah. Are you calling the upset right now, Zach? You got my Purdue boys back?
I don't know if I'm calling it yet. Let me talk to the Oregon guys first, and then I'll make a call.
Don't start that. Yeah.
I will say this. I don't know if Oregon is as sound defensively as people think they are. And I think if you've got a gunslinger at quarterback, I
know it's it's different teams. Long time ago, I think it was the LeGarrette Blount era for Oregon, but Purdue had a home and home with Oregon a while back, even during that Hope Hazel era that we were not very good at football. And in both of those games, we played them tight. I think the Ross-Ade game was an overtime game, and then we pushed them out in Oregon. So, it's not a program we're going to be afraid of by any means. And Notre Dame, a lot of people don't realize Purdue's got the second most wins against Notre Dame of any program in college football. Now Notre Dame's owned the series. It's something like 50s, 58 to like 27 or something like that. Like they've owned the series, but
Yep.
there's only one team that's had more wins against them than Purdue has.
Yeah. Yeah. And Notre Dame's not infallible, right? I mean, they lost to Duke,
Yeah.
or no, they almost lost to Duke. They lost to Louisville.
Yeah.
One other point to your Oregon thought, Russ. I am very skeptical, which is why I'm skeptical a little bit about Ohio State. I'm always a little skeptical about transfer quarterbacks in their first year. Dylan Gabriel's a great quarterback, but like you look at Bo Nix, it took Bo Nix year 2. It took Michael Penix at Washington to year 2. Now they were good in year 1, but like they made some mistakes because they're still getting used to the offense. Hudson Card is in year 2. He's got a year under his belt. They're figuring things out at receiver. They've got a playmaker in Claret at tight end. They have a 1-2 punch at running back.
And if you look at Walter's defense year 2, when he was year 2 at Illinois, it went from being around like 90s to 100 ranked to like it was like a top 30 defense. Now it wasn't as obviously the last year he was there, they were a defense that was pushing Michigan, and giving them a chance to beat Michigan. But his second year, they were a top 30, top 25 caliber defense. So if you can make that kind of jump this year, it'll be very, very impactful.
Yeah. So I think what we're saying to those who are listening is that Purdue, I think Purdue could really make some noise in the league this year. Like it's a hard schedule. And I think you even said it, you said it well, Russ. They could be 4-8. They could go 2-10, but the roster is going to give people problems. And the team's going to give people problems. And so don't be surprised when you show up expecting a 3-touchdown win when you get upset, which is going to make this season really fun.
I don't know that Nebraska fans realize we've beaten Nebraska 4 of the last 6 times we've played them. Nebraska thinks they're on the road and they're going to be a blue blood again. They're going to be, and it's like, Purdue's beat you 4 of the last 6 times. You didn't win the West. You never won the West. Purdue at least won the West, so yeah.
Yeah. So it'll be curious. I'm really the Penn State and the Oregon games, you have me thinking, Russ. So my upset that I picked early is I've got Nebraska beating USC. And I picked that a while back. I need to rethink. I mean, I think that can still happen regardless, but you certainly have me thinking about Penn State or Oregon getting. Oh man, that's a fun thought. Oh, this is good. Let's transition. What you've been around Purdue your whole life. Your parents met there. You were saying off air, you had your diapers changed on Ross-Ade bleachers. Yeah. So like, the Purdue culture. What should the common fan know about the culture, the campus, different traditions, rivalries? Like what knowledge can you drop on us?
Yeah. So depends on how much time you got there, Zach. I actually wrote I think of my junior year of high school, my thesis paper was how Joe Tiller revolutionized Purdue football. And when I got in writing it was like 22 pages long. And my teacher's like, yeah, it's got to be 10 pages long. So, yeah. I could talk your off about Purdue football, but I would just say that Purdue is a more traditioned and storied program, especially within the Big Ten, than people realize. They're a charter member of the Big Ten, and it actually goes back to, the initial conference that became the Big Ten was the Western Conference, and Purdue was a founding member of that conference with, and Michigan wasn't even a part of that. Ohio State wasn't a part of that. They came along after Purdue did. And, some of the rivalries that Purdue has, like Purdue and Indiana is the 6th most played Power 4 rivalry game. Purdue and Indiana doesn't seem like this big, but they've played that longer than Ohio State, Michigan, longer than Army, Navy. Mm-hmm. And then like I said, Purdue's beat Notre Dame more times than any other school except for one. Purdue, Illinois even have a long-standing rivalry that they've played 90 plus times. So, it's a team that's got a lot of history. We may not have been successful over the last, couple decades, but Brahms put us back on the map. I think we're back to where we expect to compete. We expect to go to a bowl game, and we expect to catch fire every now and then and push for a conference championship game possibly. So, and like I said, we're the kind of fan base that we're okay with being slept on a little bit in football, because we know what we have, we know the talent we have, we know the ability we have to compete, and knock off some of these big teams. So
Very cool. And maybe talk a little bit as you've grown up in the old Oak and Bucket rivalry. What has that meant just for you as a fan?
We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end,
What will I become? Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Well, it's meant a lot. Obviously, like I said, it's the longest running rivalry that Purdue has. But Purdue's kind of dominated that for the most of my lifetime. I think Tiller lost it maybe twice in 12 years. And then Braum obviously brought a little bit of the domination back to it. But, one of the chants that, people have long asked for, especially the boosters and the older generation has asked for us to get rid of at Purdue, is every game we play, when they kick off, like Notre Dame's got the Go Irish chant no matter who they play. Well, Purdue often yells IU sucks at every game. So even though it's a domination rivalry, like Purdue doesn't forget about it no matter who we're playing. There's shirts out there that say Purdue fans' two favorite teams is Purdue and then whoever's playing IU.
Yeah.
So it's definitely one of those games that, I would put it close to that level of the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry that, if we go 2-10 this year, our 2 wins better be Indiana State and IU.
Yeah.
So it's a game that we don't expect to lose at all pretty much in football.
Yeah. I say, don't tell that to Kurt Signetti because he thinks Purdue sucks and so does Ohio State and Michigan. So
yeah.
Apparently he understood the rivalry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was saying another fun fact about Purdue IU is they play for the Old Oak and Bucket, which I know you've heard of that and you've talked about that before, but it's unique because I believe it's the only rivalry trophy in college football that grows. So they actually add a link to it every year. So there's this big chain that comes off the handle of that Oak and Bucket, and every year whoever wins puts their school's letter on that chain. So it's either an I if Indiana wins and a P if Purdue wins. So you'll see it when the team wins and gets the bucket. They don't just pull the bucket out of the trophy case. They then pull this long chain that's like getting held up by like 20 or 30 football players getting strung out. So it's pretty cool to see in person. It's actually a growing rivalry trophy.
That's fun. Do they do it on the field after they win the game? Or is it
no, that'd be cool. If they had it like ready to go and just like forges it onto the chain or add it on the chain. That'd be awesome. Yeah, no, I haven't seen the process of them adding it, but yeah.
They got to do like a Big Ten tailgate of that. That's so much cooler than lifting a turtle and like the Ohio State Illabuck. It's like, oh, we've got the turtle. I don't think we've even played for it in like 10 years.
Yeah.
8 years. I don't know. Oh man. Okay. This is, I'll get you out on this and then we'll just do kind of last plugs for shows and whatnot. But I have been asking each person who comes on to the pod, what is like the best thing to grab in terms of food, either near campus or just in terms of cultural to where your campus is at. And so in Minnesota, we had the Juicy Lucy, which apparently I think is maybe more broad, but that was very exciting. In Nebraska, it was a cinnamon roll covered in chili, which was weird. But apparently, TJ, who does the Common Fan podcast, he's like, you got to try it. It's amazing. We also talked about runs as a bit. What is unique to Purdue and to Indiana in terms of food?
So the state of Indiana's kind of food that they're known for is the breaded tenderloin. And so if you haven't
So
had one of
good.
those, it's a breaded tenderloin that is the size of like a plate, if not larger, but a normal size bun. So it's just impressive to kind of look at. And a lot of times they'll throw like a couple pickles and a couple onions on there or something too, but just kind of like a random dressing. But I mean, the thing's like bigger than your head, but they give you a same old regular size bun. And those things are just amazing. I don't know that there's a place to go to around campus that's my go-to to get one of those, because I grew up north of Indianapolis. And so I knew a couple places close to where I live that I always would go to get one. And when I go back and visit, I'll get one. But that's kind of the state of Indiana food. As far as like on Purdue's campus, if you want like the experience of like game day or after a game going to, there's a restaurant we have that's called Triple X. Now it's a family establishment. It's don't let the name scare you. It's actually kind of like Waffle House meets a burger joint, if you will. And it's got a menu that many of the menu items and burgers or entrees are named after former Purdue athletes. So there's David Badai is a famous diver from Purdue, won gold medals. He's got an entree on there. Drew Brees, of course, has got a menu on there. There's a Purvis burger that's like a peanut butter on a cheeseburger, and it's just this. It's very interesting, but it's been focused on like Guy Fieri's been there. It's been on the BTN tailgates, eats, that kind of things, and it's just an experience. It's not necessarily like wow you food wise, but it's just a part of an experience. Like when you go on campus or you're going to a game, you've got to stop and try that either on the way in or on the way out.
That's fun. That's really fun. I'll have to. So my in-laws live, I want to say an hour from West Lafayette. They're in Martinsville, Indiana. I forget.
Okay.
They're like a half hour from Bloomington.
Yeah, that's South Indy, so that's probably more like an hour and a half to 2
Yeah.
hours from Lafayette, West Lafayette. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sad. I had a chance to go to an Indiana Penn State football game, and I chose not to, and I'm kicking myself for not. But it's fun to be around the culture and like the love for Purdue and Indiana, and the food, the tenderloin. Oh, it's so good.
It is.
It's when I first one of my wife's friends, we were visiting, and it's like first thing he said, you need to get tenderloin. I'm like beef tenderloin? No, like tenderloin. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then we got one, and it's just thin breaded pork tenderloin on a bun, and I'm like, oh, it's incredible. It's so good. So
Definitely.
Cool. Well, again, tell us where we can find you, Russ, in terms of the Boiler Express.
Yeah, so like I said, anywhere you find audio or even visual, we're on YouTube. We're on Facebook. We go Facebook Live when we do live podcasts. Just search Boiler Express. You'll find us there. If you look up our handle on Twitter or X or Instagram, it's Boiler Express with no spaces, followed by an underscore. If you want to come at me personally for some of the takes that I might have just had, or you want to talk to me personally, it's BXP_Russ on Twitter or X.
And what days do you typically drop podcasts?
We try to go live on Tuesday nights.
Tuesday
nights, and we're also trying to add some things in here, here and there. If I can go solo or somebody else can get on there, and you'll see us on Big Ten Huddle. Obviously, I'm on here with you talking about the state of the program. We try to get on some other things in our socials. If you follow us there, we'll share that, and you can usually link to that and find those shows as well.
Cool. Well, Russ, thanks for joining us. Very excited just to partner again into the college huddle, but also excited for Purdue. I think it's going to be a fun season to see how they do. So for the rest of you guys listening, thanks so much. Russ, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Zach. Appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. For the rest of you, take care. God bless.